Chapter 22. The accident, considerably more than a bump on the head, happened one bitterly cold afternoon when Dorothy and I were waiting after school for the streetcar. We were to meet Flora and Catherine to skate on the frozen athletic field in front of Franklin High School. Mama would be there too, and would take us home. It was an historical occasion. Rarely did the temperature in Seattle dip low enough for long enough to allow outdoor skating. Because of the biting cold, Dora and I had waited in Mr. Morrison's candy store. When we heard the clanging of the streetcar, we ran out to the pedestrian island. Just as the streetcar opened its doors, I realized that I had left my skates in the candy store and turned back. Suddenly, I felt a terrible shock, a crushing in my knees, my body being thrown into the air and slammed onto the brick pavement, and some great object coming over me. Wheels were spinning within a finger width of my head. I felt myself grabbing, trying to hold on, feeling the terrible heat, yet too terrified to let go. Finally, the turbulence stopped. I lay motionless, unable to focus. "Oh God, I've killed her," someone moaned. I was aware of hands pulling at me, frightened voices urging me to let go, cold, rough bricks scraping my flesh, my body being lifted and carried to a soft surface, voices strained with terror. Poor thing, so much blood. Her clothes are in shreds. What if she dies right here on my couch? Oh dear Jesus. The sound of a siren brought back a sliver of reality, a flickering memory of all the times we had asked Papa why the siren never came up our hill. Now, as the wailing augmented into an ear-splitting screech and then suddenly fell into oblivion, I knew that the siren had come for me. Frenzied activity resumed. I was picked up and carried out to the ambulance through the crowd that had gathered. I felt the stares upon my limp body. I tried to focus on the faces peering out from their heavy wool hats and scarves, hoping to spot Dor. All of them seemed unfamiliar, frozen by the cold and a morbid curiosity, wondering if they were witnessing death itself. As the ambulance raced down Rainier Avenue towards Franklin High School, the wailing of the siren helped me hold on to my thoughts. I kept trying to convey the message that Mama was at the frozen athletic field, waiting, but I couldn't, and we wailed on into a great, misty unknown. Voices brought me back from the mist. "Tried to stop a car, did you? Don't you know that young girls don't belong in the middle of the street?" I felt fingers probing my flesh. I heard Papa's voice anxiously asking questions that I had no answers for. "Where's Dorothy? Where's Mama?" I heard the word emergency, and remembered how Papa had made us memorize his office number for use in case of an emergency. I wondered who had known to call his number. Nurses came in and out with scissors, ointments, bandages, and water. Interrupting my stupor, I felt a cool hand on my head and the sound of falling tears. I knew that Mama was there. It wasn't until days later, when I was back home under her care, that I heard of her frightening experience. She had waited in the cold, her fears mounting with each streetcar that came along. Expectantly, she watched the doors opening and people getting off, but never Dor or me. She heard the siren going south along Rainier Avenue, then north again. One always has that terrible fear at the sound of an ambulance. As darkness was creeping in and only a few stragglers were left skating, she had received word that I was in the hospital. But which hospital? She didn't know, and where was Dorothy? She founded up Flora and Cat and drove home in a panic. There she found Dorothy with Mrs. Williams, who was worried sick about Catherine. Dorothy was sobbing wildly. She had run all the way home in a state of shock, saying that I had been killed. Poor Mama, hysterical and frantic, didn't know where to turn, until finally she received Papa's call that although I was badly injured, I was alive. Soon Papa was teaching me to walk on crutches. Mama wrote Mother, "They are charging the man who ran over Franny with negligent driving, speeding, and running through a safety zone. Frances and Dorothy both have to testify against him, but they will delay the trial until Franny is up and around. Poor Franny. She was dragged over the rough brick for many feet. It shredded the nice bloomers we made her last summer." Papa questioned me at length, preparing me for the trial. Where was I when the car struck me? Why was I where I was? His questions made me feel like a criminal. I was reminded of how much disruption I had caused, the terrible cost of the hospital and doctor, the cost of my ruined clothes, the anguish of the whole family, Mama's terrible ordeal. A letter signed by the whole class arrived in the mail, telling me to get well. Several friends came and expressed their concern, but somehow, I felt that I had cheated them. It would have been nicer of me to have died, so they could have had endless discussions on how it was to see a dead person. Finally, one afternoon, Mama drove me to school. I hobbled up the long stairs, down the hall, and into the classroom on my crutches, not knowing what to expect. To my surprise, I was greeted with a gasp of admiration and a cheer. I was a returning hero, one who had participated in a great adventure. I had been run over by a car and ridden in an ambulance. What more could one ask? My poor, wobbly, deaf teacher made it her mission every day to come down and help me up the long flight of stairs. I tried to explain that I didn't need her help, but of course she couldn't hear. With her sympathetic heart, she wouldn't have believed me anyway. I pleaded with Mama. Please tell her she shakes so much that she's going to knock both of us down the stairs, then I'll be worse off than ever. Mama explained that it gave my teacher a missionary feeling. Although the trial date was delayed, spring wasn't. With it came baseball season. It was to be the 7th grade girls' first year in competition. We would play the 8th grade girls at the end of the season. As soon as I was able to lay aside my crutches, I was playing and was elected captain of the 7th grade girls' team. As we practiced, I had my first realization of the variance that existed between girls' sports and boys' sports. Whereas girls had to be satisfied with a one-game championship on our home diamond, the boys, with their special uniforms, represented the whole school and got to play the other schools in the district. They even had a girl cheerleader and a rooting section. They might end up as all-city champions. My insight was due, no doubt, to the fact that, in swimming, I had already experienced competition where no discrimination existed. I began to gripe, "It's unfair. Just like the Boy Scouts. We should be allowed to play the other schools. And we should start by playing Miss Woof's pets at Coleman School." The team agreed. We thought the boys would be sympathetic, but instead, they taunted us as they waited for us to finish practicing on their field. "Girls run like ostriches," they shouted. "Hope she don't hit no homer. It'll take her all day to run the bases." Then came the ultimate insult. "But what can you expect of a team whose captain wears black bloomers?" The words were a shock. I ran toward the school, mortified beyond belief. During the wee, small hours, my mortification turned to anger. I swore that as the captain of the team, I would take up the cause. I formed a committee and began what I anticipated would become one of the great confrontations in the history of Brighton Grade School. First, we went to my regular teacher, who had given me 6 A's. She was sympathetic, but so old that she couldn't concentrate. In fact, she was having a hard time staying awake in class. We went to the principal, but the answer was a foregone conclusion. We learned the meaning of male chauvinism. Finally, we approached Miss Woof. We felt that, if nothing else, she could arrange a game between us and her Coleman girls. That was a mistake. She let us know that she considered girls who played baseball on par with girls who chewed gum. At last, we considered going to the mayor. Big Bertha was certainly interested in the plight of women. Before we could save the streetcar fare, the spotlight had shifted. The Brighton boys team was enjoying a no-loss season. Papa and Mama had been faithful supporters of the boys team, since Fleur had been the very popular cheerleader 2 years before. Papa predicted that some of the boys were destined for great things in baseball. On the other hand, he said of Freddie Hutchinson, the youngest member of the team, "That kid's going to be in plenty of trouble, and it's too bad. His father is a prominent doctor." Freddie was attending Brighton School by default, as it were, having been transferred from Emerson, his neighborhood school. Being transferred was the school district's way of handling live wires. We knew Freddie well. We had first met him at the swimming meets, where he and Dor had started making Google eyes at each other. Then, Freddie had begun coming to our house on his horse to take Dor out riding. Then he urged her to come swimming at Rainier Beach. If Dor went, we all had to go, which Flora and I didn't like. It was a long walk, the bathhouse was primitive, the kids were wild, and besides, most of our friends swam at Seward. However, Dor felt right at home with wild kids, so Flora and I didn't get much say. Dor would pester and pout and accidentally drop a piece of Mama's good china until she got her way. Flora and I were always looking for ways to get out of going. One day, some of the wildest boys at the beach had put on an exhibition that gave us just the excuse that we needed. I'm not sure if it was a regular feature or a special show for the Bigham girls, but whatever it was spectacular, and it left us wondering if we had actually seen what we thought we saw. We had been sitting on the dock, tanning. We knew that several boys had disappeared in the bushes above, but we didn't think much about it until we heard wild whooping. We turned around to see the boys dashing down an old ramp that ran very close to the swimming area. With arms, legs, and other appendages flying, they dove off into the water. It was called skinny dipping. I'm not sure why, but I know it was the first time I ever saw a skinny, dipping or otherwise. Fleur could hardly wait to get home and snitch on the naked boys. I'm not sure that Papa believed it. He said, Mama certainly did. Roy, I want you to forbid the girls from ever going there again. And I'm not sure that Dorothy should be seeing Freddie Hutchinson. Had Mama ever dreamed that Freddie was destined to become one of the greatest figures in Seattle baseball history, or that he would be the one for whom the Hutchinson Cancer Clinic would be named, she may have changed her orders. When the season ended, the Brighton team had won the All-City Championship. The whole school was dancing on the diamond. Papa gave a big party at our house. What was I, a girl liberationist, to do? I joined Mama and Florence in making food and punch for the party. My mind had never been free from the fear of the trial. How could I tell the story to the judge when I couldn't even construct it well enough to satisfy Papa's constant questions? When the day arrived, Dor and I sat huddled close together in the cold, austere surrounding of the courtroom. I was in a state of panic. Through my time of suffering, I had hoped that the man who hit me would be sentenced to the pen for life, but when he finally stood up before the judge, I became confused. He was ragged and dejected, and told the judge about his misfortunes. He didn't have brakes on his car because he didn't have any money, no job for months, and 7 children. Everyone in the courtroom was on the verge of tears. The judge turned to me. His voice was stern. "And where were you when the car hit you?" "Well, As I fumbled and stuttered through my explanation, I became convinced that the person going to the pen would be the one who left her skates in the candy store and ran back. After all, what was a young girl like me doing out in the middle of the street? At this point, Papa got to his feet, uttering courtroom jargon. The judge seemed relieved. "I see your point, Mr. Bigham. Case dismissed." On the way home, Papa told Mama, "Poor cuss doesn't have anything. Imagine trying to feed all those children," Mama said, "and not having work for months. What do people do who have no heat in this cold weather?" Papa must not have slept well that night in his warm bed. The next morning, he called the fuel company and ordered a ton of coal to be sent to the poor man. I didn't sleep well that night either. I was more confused than ever about who was guilty. Papa had maintained that if a man really wanted to work, work could be found. After his confrontation with the man who ran me over, he seemed to change his mind. The ton of coal he bought was the beginning of his charities. He regularly packed up boxes of basic food and gave them to agencies that were feeding the hungry. He told Mama to keep extra food in the house, and when anyone came begging, to give them a meal. And find work for people to do. Mama was happy to comply. We had a new garage built, new shrubs put in. Then Papa decided that he would have the fireplace built which he had been talking about for years. He brought in a bricklayer whom he called the Old Scotsman, a happy-mannered man dressed in shabby overalls and covered with mortar stains. Papa gave him the specifications. Red brick, with an old-fashioned crane. Imagine cooking a ham with lima beans in an iron pot. The bricklayer quoted a price. Papa was surprised. "Are you sure you can do it for that?" "Well, I'm sure needing the work, sir," he replied. It took Old Scotsman longer than he'd figured. Mama said it was because he liked to drink tea and visit, but Papa discounted that. On his last day, the whole family gathered to say goodbye. It is one of the best memories I have of my father. "I know you haven't made much money on the job," Papa said. The man admitted that was true. Papa figured out his time and material and paid him accordingly. He explained to us later, "Of course, I wasn't liable for any more than we agreed on, but the old man did good work and is deserving of good pay." Papa enjoyed the fireplace more for having been generous. Mama enjoyed the fireplace too. She often sat there with her mending basket. As for cooking lima beans and ham, her electric stove was much less bother, and her cookbook didn't give recipes for outdoor cooking. The next year, when baseball season returned, I was considering taking up the girls' cause again. But then, the unexpected happened. I was chosen as cheerleader of the boys' baseball team. From then on, I was too busy practicing the cheers to think about women's rights. 1, 2, 3, 4. Who are we for? Brighton, Brighton, Brighton. Of course, I needed a snappy outfit in the school colors. Papa said I should wear floors, but Mama felt that I deserved one of my own. She got out her scissors, never suspecting that her glorious creation would be a contributing factor in my final confrontation with Miss Wolf. When I wore the outfit on the first game day, Miss Wolf inferred that Mama hadn't given much thought to longevity, or to warp and woof for that matter. My defense of motherhood arose again. The madder I got, the more furiously I chewed my gum. She decided to make an example of the one she considered the class's biggest culprit. She grabbed me from my seat, a struggle since she was tiny and I had grown 2 inches that year. She demanded, in a voice I considered quite unladylike, repeat it 10 times. I gulped and began the words I knew so well. I raced through them 9 times, wondering all the while if I would have the courage to substitute the lines that we girls had improvised on the playground. I realized that it might cause me some severe repercussions. I breathed from my diaphragm, as Miss Snowden had taught us, a gum-chewing girl. In that very moment, something happened. What it was, I could never explain, except to say that maybe Miss Snowden's lessons had taken effect. At any rate, I couldn't utter the derogatory words. Instead, I simply called upon all of my dramatic abilities and finished the poem as it was written on the board. I made an elaborate bow. My classmates gave me thunderous applause. They wanted an encore. Unfortunately, I hadn't prepared an encore. Miss Woof supplied one. The warp goes lengthwise and is crossed by the woof. When I left Brighton to go to Franklin High, I felt as sorry for Miss Woof as I had for Miss Knight. Poor soul. She was in for a bigger challenge than I had given her. Dor would be in her class next year. As it turned out, however, before Dor could wreak any havoc in the home EC department, she came under the same edict that Freddie Hutchinson had. Mr. Dimwit advised Mama that Dorothy should change schools. Mama didn't argue. She actually saw an advantage. She asked that Dor be moved to John Muir, the grade school near Franklin High. Now Mama could pick us up together on the way to town.